So there was an election this week. Did you forget? Many people did.
I kind of did, actually.
Yeah. We got an email about it, which is one reason I remembered on Tuesday. Here's the email. Hey, Sound Politics. Happy Election Day. I just dropped off my ballot a few minutes ago. There was only one question on my ballot, which I understand is true for most of King County. My question is, why did we have this special election at all?
Great question.
Did the county not know that the levy was expired? As you can tell by the second sentence of this email, I am familiar with procrastination, voting on election day, minutes maybe before the deadline. Was it urgent to get it renewed right now? My understanding is they won't start collecting for this levy until next year. It seems like the county could have saved a lot of money by not holding this election at all. I heard your episode from a few months ago arguing that we vote too often. And I agree. Thanks, Graham.
Graham for co-host of this podcast.
Graham.
Great question.
Yeah, and we're going to answer this on the show today. But can I just say, I love it when my gripes become listeners' gripes, too.
I mean, they're channeling you, and that is frightening and promising at the same time.
We could just drag me out and replace me with Graham.
Well, Graham, your offer is in the mail. It's time for Sound Politics. Welcome to Sound Politics. I'm Libby Denkmann, and it's my promise to you, dear listeners, that we will be talking about more than just the King County fingerprint scanner special election today.
Nope, that's the whole episode. I'm Scott Greenstone. No. We do have a big show today because it is the home stretch of the legislative session in Olympia. Rent caps, recycling, requiring gun permits, lots of stuff getting close to passage in Olympia. We're headed to the governor's desk that could affect your day-to-day.
We're also going to talk about what the heck is going on with taxes. Every single time I look, the revenue picture is changing. What people are planning has changed. So we're going to get to that in a little bit.
I just want to tell you guys, I was on here a few weeks ago, Melissa Santos at Axios, and I told you all these budgets were fake. I told you they were fake budgets. Did I not?
Melissa
and here
warned us. Melissa
None
Santos.
of it is real.
Before we talk about the budgets, Melissa Santos of Axios, we promised to move on from the special election, but I need to know, does this week's vote contend for most boring special election ever?
There are some special taxing districts that are even more obscure. Like there's like swamp districts and stuff. I'm not saying the name right, but it's a tough
districts?
It's like
cemetery
a tough
districts.
Conservation districts.
Yeah,
okay, that's
we
what
have
I mean.
a cemetery district on
So
Vashon
it's a
Island.
tough competition.
Here. Can I just say power moves by the guests today? They're both inserting themselves into the conversation before being introduced. Paul Query with the Washington Observer with the power
Apologies.
Move. Melissa
just can't
Santos.
wait.
It's gorgeous. I love it. You're friends of the program at this point.
I, for one, am really looking forward to Melissa's rant about budget transparency.
Every year.
Paul, do you think this is one vote too many? Living in Vashon Island, home of one of the biggest ballots in the state many years?
I mean, the reason that those elections exist is so that you can put something on the ballot that raises taxes or renews a tax levy and get your voters and only your voters out to vote for it. That's why we have all these special elections. They're like anti-transparent and arguably anti-democratic by definition. And yeah, I'd agree that we should get rid of them.
So the timing is very purposeful, is what you're saying. And it's hovering right now, turnout around 20%. That will rise as more ballots are counted. But this is about getting the hardcore and people who will approve taxes out.
Yeah, and it's also actually sort of a question as to whether it works anymore. Because now that everybody gets a ballot in the mail, you get the super voters from both sides of the spectrum. So all the people who are going to say, tax? No, thank you. No fingerprint scanners.
Yeah, Tacoma just had a transportation levy fail. I mean, there's things failing. Enumclaw had a school levy fail. There's definitely pieces on this special election that have failed.
I do want to say a county spokesperson emailed me, saying the placement in April was a unique combination of they knew the levy was expiring, but the program had a big surplus that could get them through 2025, which is why they didn't they could wait until this election. But at the same time, they are planning other initiatives like a parks levy on the August ballot, and so that's why they went for April. And yes, Graham, you're correct. Thank you again for your email. It is more expensive. I asked King County Elections about the cost question that you had at the end, and their best estimate is this election is going to cost $3 to $3.5 million. Graham was right. It's not the only question on the ballot in the entire county. There are some fire and school districts that are asking other questions like levies, bonds, propositions. If it had just been those, the election would have likely cost more like $300,000. So maybe like 1/10 of the cost.
So the county spends $3 million on special election to guarantee itself the ability to
to
take in more
Whoa.
property taxes to the tune
Spicy.
of $130 million, $125 million, something like that. I mean,
Spicy.
some people would say it's a good trade-off.
Even though April special elections are maybe the most exciting things in politics, let's turn to our actual topic this week. There is an air of anticipation and anxiety in Washington state as we watch to see how or whether even the state legislative session will end in Olympia.
This Sunday marks the official end of the session, though Governor Ferguson adding a special session is always a possibility. And while there are still lots of questions left to answer, policymakers are slowly figuring out which bills will make it out of Olympia to become law and which will end up on the cutting room floor.
Not to mention that whole budget thing they still have to figure out.
Just a little thing. So let's dig in on what's been decided and what's still in limbo, starting with policy changes. There's a lot of bills that we want to get to today, but one was on both your lists when we chatted with you before this show, Paul Query and Melissa Santos. So, Paul, first off, why are you so into recycling? Why was this something you guys wanted to talk about?
I'm just kind of a big nerd on the whole question. I mean, the history of how we get rid of our garbage in the United States is, it's really fascinating. There's some interesting books about it. And it's also I like to track the money and and the lobbying fights, and the recycling fight for the last few years has been probably the best and most expensive knife fight in Olympia. You've got all these sort of major international companies that are going to be affected by this change. You've got the garbage haulers who are protecting, their, existing business model. You've got sort of big environment, really kind of weighing in on it. It's just, there's just a lot of moving pieces, and it's just been fun to cover.
Melissa, this was on your list. What does the bill actually do? How would it actually change our recycling system?
It's been changed. It changed a little bit toward the end there, but essentially what it would do is make the people who produce like little single-serve plastic things and bags and even paper packaging sort of pay for a system to recycle that. Because right now, when you go from to a different county or a different place and you just stare at the recycle, compost, bins, and you're like, I don't know what to do.
It's the source of the biggest fights that my husband and I have, and I'm not exaggerating, is can you recycle that? We yell at each other over plastics.
This happens in my household
marriages.
too. But I mean, this would standardize what's recyclable across the state. And there's 11 counties, I think it is, that don't even do curbside recycling. So it would make everyone has to have recycling available, but it would be standardized. Is the idea.
Yeah. Right now, the producers, they send you stuff in packaging. You take the packaging off, you throw it in the blue bin. The garbage people come and take it away, and maybe it gets recycled, maybe it doesn't. But the people who sent you the packaging don't really care very much and don't have a lot of incentive to care. And it also costs you about $10 a month. And so the idea here is that you make them care about it, you make them responsible for it, you put the $10 a month on them, and that's going to drive better behavior in the design of packaging and higher recycling rates and so on and so forth. Now, there's an argument about whether it's going to work, and also an argument about whether it's actually going to save any money, because these are some of the most profitable companies in the world, and they're not just going to eat your $10 a month. And the idea is that, all that cost may just get baked into the cost of the packaging and the cost of the goods and come back on the consumer.
And that was the opposition, was this will increase the cost of groceries, was the big argument, right? Because they're just going to pass on these costs.
That milk carton is going to be that much more expensive.
And so that was the opposition. But they've been working on this for years, haven't they, Paul? So maybe it's...
I mean, this is, I think, the third year of this iteration of the bill. And there were bills before that, but I think the real push started in the 23 session.
Not that I don't want to keep talking about recycling, but we have a lot to get onto.
Should we talk about guns? What are we going to talk about?
No, let's talk about something even more fun. Another bill that you both were following closely is SB 5041, concerning unemployment insurance benefits for striking or lockout workers, and it basically covers what it says in the title, right, Melissa? Like, what stood out to you about this bill?
Well, what stands out now is that there's a disagreement between the House and the Senate about how much in terms of benefits to give. This was in my notes. One of the chambers, I think it was the House, the House amended the legislation so striking workers could only get 4 weeks of unemployment benefits. The Senate wants it to be 12 weeks. So that's a pretty big difference. But essentially the idea, again, is that this would make it so when workers go on strike, like say, Boeing workers, that they aren't pressured to come back just because they don't have income. That's the idea. I went into the technical stuff first, but yes, that's sort of the idea. But there's clearly a disagreement about how much is fair to provide through the state benefit system for that.
And Paul, what are the pros and cons on this? Is this just like labor versus business? Pretty classic breakdown of arguments.
It's pretty much a labor versus business idea, and it's important to remember that the unemployment that the businesses pay for the unemployment insurance system. I mean, they pay unemployment insurance for so that they're understandably pretty hot under the collar about that whole idea. Labor's idea is to give them more leverage, give unions more leverage in the bargaining process, because there's a lot of organized labor, and the one that always jumps out at me is the grocery store unions, the United Food and Commercial Workers for the most part. Grocery strikes are vanishingly rare because they just don't make very much money and they can't afford to go on strike. And so, this just kind of changes the dynamics there when you're negotiating a little bit. And then there's also the question of public employee strikes, which are technically illegal in Washington, but the teachers in particular go on strike on the regular. And the question about whether they could claim unemployment benefits, that's up in the air.
So that bill on the unemployment insurance has passed both the House and Senate, but in different forms. So they have to
go
agree.
To a conference committee.
Yeah, they're doing a
point.
conference committee, which is where they hash it out and agree. But that's the difference is one wants 4 weeks, one wants 12 weeks of unemployment benefits for striking workers.
And there might actually be breaking news on this fairly shortly. One of my reporters just told me that the conference committee is supposed to produce a report today.
Oh, so that usually means they would reach an agreement. Yeah,
cut a deal.
A bulletin just crossed your desk.
Yeah,
ooh,
that was exciting.
Fresh off the presses.
This is a lot of these bills are very much like in formation, potentially getting close to passing, maybe not. Another one very much like that could change today or tomorrow. A cap on rent increases. The House passed legislation that would tell landlords you can't raise a tenant's rent over 7% annually. The Senate said, make it 10 plus inflation calculated by the Consumer Price Index. Then it went back to the House since the Senate said that. House, is 10 plus okay with you. And in an extremely close vote, the House said, no, it's not okay with us. So we're going to talk about what that means for this rent legislation. But first, Melissa, how did we get to this point? Why didn't the House concur this bill, as they say?
The Housing Committee chair and the House Majority Leader just said that's just too much. You could have rent increasing by 15, 18% some years when we have high inflation, and they think that that's just not enough protection for renters.
They want to keep it at 7.
Yeah, they really want to keep it at 7, or at least get rid of that inflationary cap. But I think many of the House members, the Democrats, are uncomfortable even with a 10% cap. Think that's too high. But then when you add on that inflationary adjustment, they think that's just way too far. They also have a disagreement real fast about whether to exempt single-family homes to the degree the Senate did. And they say that's too many renters that wouldn't be covered by this.
Yeah, Margo Elias added that amendment, and I guess he didn't talk to reporters about why, but that would be a big change.
Oh, he texted me about it. Hold on one second.
Oh, he did? Great.
Yeah, he did. His floor speech was a little confusing. He essentially said he's worried that single-family homes will be taken off the market if they're not exempted, and you need homes that are large enough for families. He had this whole story on the floor about Finnish immigrant grandmother, I think, that's why I texted him being like, what are we saying here? Sorry, Marco, but what are we saying? And so that's the argument in general, is that the worry is that if landlords will take units off the market so they're not available to rent, and then that will worsen the housing crisis. And he's worried about that for single family homes in particular.
So, Paul, what are the next steps here? Could we still see a rent cap pass this year in Washington State?
Yeah, the purpose of the conference committee is to come to some kind of compromise, and obviously, it's between 7% and 10%, and there's the single family home thing, and so I think it's likely that they get to some question. Some of the folks behind it. That bill's sponsored by Emily Alvarado, the senator from West Seattle. Is actually the House bill because she was in the House when the session started and got appointed to the Senate. And she's a true believer on rent control and the housing thing, and I think that she and the folks who are ideologically aligned with us just think that the 10% cap isn't really a cap at all.
Yeah, but getting through that Senate, it's always been the issue, right, in recent years, and now it's again Senate making last-minute changes. Okay, we got to speed this process up because we don't have time to discuss every last bill in fascinating detail. but there are a few we wanted to run through double time. So let's have a little graduation ceremony for these bills that are growing up and moving on to become laws. They grow up so fast.
Another turning point, a fork stuck in the road. Time grabs you by the wrist.
Much better. Coming down the line first is Senate Bill 5480, which prevents overdue medical debt from impacting your credit score. This is similar to a law passed by the Biden administration back in January that's now been put on hold by the Trump administration, and it's been signed by Governor Ferguson. It will take effect July 27th.
Next up, we have HB 1163, which requires gun buyers to apply for a 5-year permit from Washington State Patrol. The applicant will have to pay a fee and complete a certified firearms safety training program. Anyone that's barred from having guns awaiting trial or sentencing on felony charges or the subject of an arrest warrant will not be able to acquire a permit. This one is still waiting for the governor's signature as of now. Libby.
And rounding out the trio is HB 1321, which limits other states' National Guard troops from entering Washington without the governor's permission. Ferguson said the bill is meant to prevent other, perhaps more Trump-aligned states from sending in troops to come into our home and, quote, enforce policies that are against our core values. The Republican chairman for the state, Jim Walsh, called the bill pointless, and that was signed into law on Monday by the governor.
It's something unpredictable, but in the end it's right. I hope you had the time of your life.
Paul or Melissa, anything you want to add on any of these bills? Anything kind of tickle your fancy?
What I've said about that National Guard bill before is, if the Idaho National Guard is massing in Coeur d'Alene, I don't know that the state law is really going to help.
We're past the tipping point at that.
Well,
the grim tipping point.
Right, is if President Trump says go over there to the National Guard troops, it doesn't apply. And that's usually how they're mobilized.
But
I think
all Trump has to do is nationalize the National Guard.
Exactly.
Then he can override state law. Okay, time for a fun one. Loosening beer garden regulations, sip and stroll legislation, making Seattle Center into Bourbon Street. Melissa, you've been following HB 1515. What is this thing?
Essentially, they want you to not have to sit in a little tiny roped-off beer garden and chug your beer while, like if you have a family, like your kids trying to be like, let's go on the Ferris wheel or whatever, for events at Seattle Center, but specifically for the World Cup. That's what's really driving this legislation. They want people to be able to get a beer or a glass of wine. I think even a cocktail would be allowed into the bill, and just be able to wander around through fan events. They're having a big fan celebration at Seattle Center. And they don't want people to have to just sit in beer gardens, and they want people to really be able to move all around. There'd still be an outer perimeter. You're not going to have people just strolling down Fifth Avenue with beers, at least not legally. But unless that's part of the, outer perimeter that's allowed. But the idea is you shouldn't have to just sit in a little fenced area to drink your beer. It's not really sort of a natural experience or as fun of an experience when people are celebrating.
Yeah, we want to look cool in front of like the Brazilian soccer fans and with their caipirinhas and the Germans with their steins. It's like, we're not stuck up. We're cool. Right. We're Seattle. Come on, stroll with your beer.
But Paul, for being a little bit goofy, this bill has not been easy to pass, right?
No, it hasn't been easy to pass. And there's a thing in the legislature called the Sobriety Caucus. And that's a block of legislators, and it's a pretty powerful block of legislators. The Speaker of the House is one of them, that is pretty much opposed to expansion of access to alcohol, full stop. And it's just really difficult, even though we've got some goofy liquor law. It's really difficult to change it because of that caucus. Yeah,
that it did pass. There were some minor amendments made by the Senate. I had asked the sponsor last week, are these okay? And she was like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, and that's a win for Julia Reed, who represents, is a Democrat from Seattle who represents Seattle Center. And I think there was also some provisions in there that might lead to some kind of loosening of the rules in the Ballard beer district for the World Cup, because they're excited.
With all those breweries.
They're excited to have all the beer drinkers of the world come to town.
Actually, it could be even broader than that for the brewery district and for restaurants that want to kind of pool some sort of outdoor space with the restaurant next door to create like an outdoor drinking space. It does allow for some of that. And it's all kind of going to sunset in 2027 so they can decide. I think this was key to it passing, so they can decide, hey, did this work? Or are there drunken people running around crazy crazy all the time, and then decide whether they're doing this permanently. But it goes a little bit beyond the World Cup, so it goes through the end of 2027, and there's going to be some loosened rules for other events too at Seattle Center and in Spokane and at some of these restaurants.
Yeah, and I know that there was interest from around the state in doing this in fairgrounds and things like that.
So it sounds like the legislature got a lot of tough work done, right? Time for a beer and a stroll around Seattle Center. Wrong. Nah. There is a looming specter hanging over all of this. It's a fiscal hungry hippo, if you will. That's a budget hole to fill in the neighborhood of $15 billion over the next few years. As far as I can tell at this point, the latest plan is to mostly rely on an expanded business and occupancy tax, add more kinds of services to the sales tax, and some additional small tweaks to other taxes and fees here to make it work. Now, this is kind of a big deal. At first, they were thinking about expanding the amount that local cities and counties could hike the property tax rate up to 3%. Now, that's been limited at 1% since a 2001 voter-approved initiative. That was an Iman special back in the day. But they're not going to allow the property tax hike of more than 1% after all.
That's what they say. This is one of those where I say we will see this weekend because, yeah, I think that was very unpopular. This idea that you would let, cities raise property taxes higher each year. And counties. And school districts and the state. So it would be a layered effect. This is unpopular. They made some tweaks so that only school districts could do it. Yeah. This is, again, what's hard to follow at this end stage. But honestly, I'm not sure the math is going to math because if they tweak any of those other bills a little bit, then their whole thing falls apart. And there were a lot of leaders who really thought they couldn't do this without the property tax changes. I
think it's $200 million a year, something like that.
Yeah, for the state. The original proposals were like $700. They've scaled it back, but anyway, I'm just skeptical. This is another one of those. But yes, they have taken the property tax off the table right now, but without the wealth tax, which I think really is off the table. I think for real,
coming back in a smaller form.
In a smaller form,
resurrected wealth tax.
The resurrected wealth tax doesn't really help the budget very much, is what I would say. It's just there so they can do a legal test to see if it will survive, but they're not really balancing the budget on it. That was kind of Governor Ferguson's insistence. But since they're not going to get $2 billion or whatever from either 4 or 6, a lot of the Democrats were saying, I don't see a way to do this without the property tax piece. Yeah. But now they're saying, okay, we can not do that. So if everything's very tight now. So if any agreement goes wrong they're doing the capital gains tax adjustments, right? Isn't that one of them?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Yeah. So anything goes awry there, then they might have to come back to this. So are they
going to get this done, Paul?
I do not know.
It's not 100% clear, but the situation doesn't get any better for them after Sunday. So I think that there's a strong pressure to do this. But Melissa's not wrong. I mean, the tension there. We're told that the budget writers have come to an agreement. So there's a number on that side. Like, here's what we got to pay for, right? And so the question is to whether they can actually get that number. We don't know exactly what it is yet. We probably won't see the budget until tomorrow, maybe Saturday.
It has to be posted 24 hours before final passage, right?
Yes, but
all right, now it's time
Are these deadlines never real?
It just depends.
Just in case anyone is totally lost about why the budget writers even need to get together to agree on what they need to pay for, again, just a reminder that we do budgets in such a strange way where we base them on forecasts. So they just have to agree on how the economy is going to be and how many taxes or what they're going to have to pay for based on revenue forecasts going forward. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's one of the incentives for them to get done early because there's a new revenue forecast coming in June, and it's probably going to be ugly.
And they're worried the more changes from the Trump administration will come down that will affect things, certainly.
So that's like the tsunami on the horizon. They're trying to get off the beach.
There is pressure for them to get done, but I just...
it's very hard. I mean, at this point, they've taken hard tax votes on both sides of the rotunda, so they're kind of in on that, like the whatever political, heat you're going to take for that. They seem to have settled on this combination of expanding the sales tax to more services and surcharges on the B&O tax. The wealth tax, if it happens, will be an experiment. They bumping the top tier of the capital gains tax and the estate tax. So, like the question of they've taken the votes, they've taken the heat. They junk the wealth tax or the large wealth tax and also the head tax on the big that primarily would have fallen on the tech companies.
Like the statewide jumpstart tax.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
statewide
payroll
jumpstart
tax,
tax.
yeah.
I mean, they really backed down from the campaign against that was bankrolled by Microsoft and some other tech companies. So, we'll see.
In theory, they say they have a deal. This is what concerns me a little bit. I feel like they used to, and I feel like I sound very old when I say this. They used to say they had a deal, and they would maybe give us some high level, or at least they say we have a deal. We'll give you details tomorrow. What is this? They said on Wednesday we have a deal, and we're not going to hear about it till like Saturday. Like, what is this? Friday?
I think it was Friday
right.
at the earliest.
Is that like a pressure deal because the deadline is approaching and you're going to see the whole package and people will have to vote on it really rapidly? Like they won't have time to quibble?
I mean, there is a part of that, and I think it's one of those things where they're going to conference on the budget, right?
Yeah, they're in conference.
So they're in conference right now. So that what that means is that they can't even make amendments, though. So that's what I don't. When it comes out of one of these like hammer it out conference committees, the deal is there's no amendments.
Right. It's
like
an
it
up
just
or
has
down
to go
vote.
through because
Yeah.
otherwise they'd spend 4 days debating the budget or whatever and all the amendments. So that's why I don't totally understand the time pressure situation. It's not like there's going to be.
Well, we
Melissa
will,
just
no matter
threw up
what,
her dang hands. I just want to point that out to
and
listeners.
that's what we're all doing right now. And if you are confused or curious about the future yourself, dear listener, check back in. We will give you an update next week to see, and potentially even after this weekend, to
it's
see
the
if
cliffhanger of the season.
I know. Washington Observer publisher Paul Query and Axios Seattle reporter Melissa Santos, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's good to be with you.
Thanks, you guys.
That's it for Sound Politics today. Our show is edited by Gabriel Spitzer. Our producer this week is Sarah Leibovitz. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Libby Denkmann. And if you love Sound Politics, as much as we love hearing the sound of our own voices, consider a donation. There's a link in the show notes or at kuow.org/politics. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
It's something unpredictable, but in the end is right. I hope you had the time of your life.